This didn't surprise me when I was looking at the chart. Work is the number one cause for stress.
Burnout is basically a result of three things: exhaustion, cynicism, and feeling unproductive.
A lot of people think, oh, it's always the result of work. Not always. Welcome to the Consultant and the Coach podcast. I'm here with my good friend Josh. How are you, man?
Doing great. Stop whining now.
So we're doing a mic check, and I asked him about his latest race to figure out the mic check, and evidently I might have to go into some mid-coaching, mid-podcast because I hit a sore spot. But I think he's doing amazing. Yeah. But today is day 2 or podcast number 2 of the book, How to Calm Your Mind. And what we're going to do here is we are going to apply it to work. So actually, as you're going into, you've already had some amazing ideas. If you go into a business and you're consulting with a business and they're saying, hey, we have problems with burnout of some of our employees, or hey, we have problems of kind of what he talks about in the book, How to Calm Your Mind. You have 5 great applications you pulled out of this book.
Yeah, no, it was imagining, we talk about business use case, right? It's for that CEO, that HR chief who's seeing turnover going up, right? Hiring environment is hard. Culture is a secret sauce that's hard to sort of pin down. And so if you're finding, if you're an executive leader in a company and you're finding that is a significant challenge. This book actually has, I think, really interesting opportunities to a lens through which we'll talk about today, how to assess and improve your culture, your retention, your productivity as a result, I think. And so, we'll dig into that.
And I think some of the reasons he gets into that in a very good way is this book was the result of his personal burnout. He was a productivity guru, and I don't want to say was too productive, but went overtrained or went over into it, and he burned out. So it almost gives you just, hey, here's a great checklist of how not to do it, or if you are in burnout, how do you calm your mind so you can get back to being productive again? Yeah. So what's our devotion for the day?
Yeah, so we got Psalm 29:11. Let me pull that up.
Yeah, this is a good psalm as it applies to, how do you calm your mind, and what does it look like?
Yeah. Psalm 29:11, and there's many verses about this, so there's lots to choose from around this idea of peace in Scripture, which is, I think, very much synonymous with calm or shalom. As we talked about last time, but Psalm 29:11, one of many. The Lord gives his people strength. The Lord blesses his people with peace. And so I think, again, as people of faith, we believe that ultimate peace is found in Christ. Again, not that you have to share that to listen to this podcast, but that's certainly the lens through which we look at all this. But then as we begin to dig into these, we recognize there's also very practical aspects of peace that we can begin to introduce to the workplace. But ultimately, that's where the source of peace will come from, is through understanding of who we are and who God made us to be.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I loved about this book is the number of charts in the book. And this didn't surprise me when I was looking at this chart. Work is the number one cause for stress. So, which is fascinating, because as people of faith, you keep reading about shalom or peace and other. Well, we all have to work, or most of us have to work. Right. So what do we do?
Yeah. Well, and this is where we've talked about, and there's a podcast we have out there on toil versus work, way back now, almost a year ago. But there's a difference between toil and work, right? There's toil as a result of the fall, and work is something to be fulfilling and kind of redemptive. And so most people who stress out from work, we would say, I think from a faith perspective, is actually toil, right? And we can't fully escape toil, but there's certainly ways to redeem toil. But most people who are suffering from sort of the stress, I think that would be work-related, is really going to be toil-related, right? And that in and of itself is in need of redemption and change and a different sort of approach overall. But and it's not a surprise, right? I mean, that is a result of the broken world we live in.
So you came up with 5 really good applications, work applications. What was the first work application out of this book on how to calm your mind as it relates to work, work burnout or work problems? Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this again through, if we're going in, we're trying to understand the first thing,
assessing, and this is consultant language for the first thing you have to do is assess, right? But there's several assessments that I think I sort of picked up on. One was formal, but the first one I would do, and I've done this in other situations, is assessing the current state. In this case, typically a lack of calm or anxiety is a result of something in the daily schedule, right? And so I think the first thing I would do with an executive team and or with everyone in the company is just doing a time management assessment. And you have to be careful how you do this, right? Because some people get bent out of shape because, you're the employer, you don't have any right to dabble in my, after hours stuff, right? But the reality is if people are stressed out, it's important not for the employer to know, but the employer has a role in helping the individual know what things, maybe how they're spending their time and whether or not that's having an impact on their work stress. So if you're drinking, 6 cups of coffee every day, or if you're staying up till 3 a.m. and then getting to work at 8 a.m., maybe that's having an impact on your work stress, right? Whether you like it or not. And so I think the first thing to do is there's, and he talks a lot about, some issues around time management, but that I would do a time management, like 15-minute incremental study of people's time, helping through discussion and exploration and groups in the right settings in the right way that works for the company, helping people see how they're spending their time, how much screen time they're getting, right? Because that's a big issue. How much time they're spending on social media, how much time they're spending watching TV, how much time they're spending exercising and eating and socializing and all these things. So that's the first thing I would do, just to help people drill in on not only how they're spending their work hours, which is important, but today, because there's just this barrier broken down because of phones and other things that allow us to sort of work 24/7, help people see how much are they spending time working. And that may or may not be a driver in things he talks about, chronic stress, acute stress, things like that.
And I've used frequently, the task management, I typically do it with every person in our organization or upper management once a year, because any more than that, it's micromanaging. But once a year, I'm like, hey, this week, just write down what are you accomplishing this week. But some of the things that we'll show is maybe you move meeting schedules around, or like what you said, hey, maybe something's going on outside of work that's causing bleed into work.
Yeah. Absolutely. These things play together, right? I'm a big believer in family system theory, right? And people will be doing all sorts of things that by themselves make absolutely no sense until you understand the context in which they're coming from in terms of the interplay of their work and family life, outside work life, whatever they're doing. Because that stress will change their, a sick child, right? A stressed marital relationship, an aging or dying parent, right? There's just all these things that play an enormous amount. So understanding those things from a time management perspective is huge.
Oh, absolutely. So what was the second thing you came up with coming out of the book?
The second one was, then he talks a lot about in there about all the stressors, right? So understanding stress and what are causes of stress, acute stress, chronic stress. I would help, work through HR again. You have to be careful how you help people articulate this in ways that aren't going to come back and harm them or even appear to harm them, right? Because people get a little bit, so it depends on your, how you would go about it. There's some ways each company would do it differently, but help people stress inventory their life, right? In particular, what are the work stresses what are there certain relationships? Is it a management relationship? Is it a project relationship that's causing stress? I've certainly had my share of team stresses that are frustrating me to no end. Unresolved conflict at work, unresolved conflict at home.
And the fascinating thing with unresolved stressors is they're different for every single individual. Yeah. So even though this podcast isn't dropping for another month, we record this right after the Thanksgiving holiday. I had a team member on my staff. He was not performing well this week. And I appreciate it. He came to me and just says, I need to let you know, my in-laws are coming in and they're staying the entire week at my house. So if I seem off this week, that's why.
Nice.
And I'm going, thank God. Here I thought I was going to, there was something wrong with our work or this or that. But what happened was in that situation, you had a family thing bleeding into work. That's as a stressor.
Stress. Definitely acute stress.
Absolutely. But it was nice because I'm not going in to say, hey, Josh, what's going on at home? There are HR boundaries that we have to do, but it is nice if someone will come to us and say, hey, there are some external home life stressors that might be bleeding in to work.
Well, what great job by you as the CEO to be able to set up an environment where people can say that. And what that's a great self-awareness of that person to be able to actually recognize that and make that, articulate that. Yeah. That's huge.
And the second part is for those that have a coaching relationship, one of the benefits of coaching is it gives someone an opportunity to talk about work life, how things spill over. So even in a coaching relationship, I don't let the company that is paying for the coaching service, I'm not going to tell them everything. So if you share with me, hey, I got in an argument with my spouse or whatever, that's not going to bleed in, and I'm not going to tell that to your employer at work. What I do is what I call broad brush strokes. We'll talk about your overall job performance, your overall stress level, because everything does overlap.
Absolutely. Well, and everything eats away also, I would say, your cognitive load, right? I learned a lot about that in some different work I've done, and so cognitive load's a huge issue, and stressors diminish your cognitive load, significantly.
Absolutely.
Right? And that just damages your ability to do good quality work, and it's kind of the same depth and breadth of normal.
So what was the third one you came up with?
Third one he mentions in the book, I won't talk a lot about, but it's in there about the Maslach's burnout inventory, which I thought was great. That would be a one I would definitely take to.
So someone that has not read the book yet, what is this inventory?
Yeah, so Maslach is a researcher that is referenced in the book, and it's I think it's the burnout equation, right? Isn't that the chapter?
I think you're right.
And burnout is basically a result of three things: exhaustion, cynicism, and feeling unproductive, right? And so those are sort of how you rate on those three things. And the burnout inventory in particular is not in the book, but I think it's one of those things where you could acquire it through Dr. Maslach or some version of something she's put together. And so this is an area where you can help people recognize, I think, where they're feeling burned out and what some of those results might be in terms of how. Because it's one thing to say, "Oh, I'm tired," right? But that's not enough. It has to be exhaustion, and it has to be some level of cynicism, and it has to be, some amount of feeling unproductive, right? And I can point to jobs where I've had that happen.
It's key to know what's causing the burnout. A lot of people think, "Oh, it's always the result of work." Not always. As we've talked about frequently, as personal life will be coming in, and in our business, we have over 75 employees. I know of several of them where their work productivity goes down, and I'm aware it's not work related. It's personal life related. So then we have to figure out, okay, how do we handle those instances where they don't want to seek counseling or family systems help or you name it? What does that look like? But it's also helpful for us because I'm like, okay, it has nothing to do with 9 to 5 Monday through Friday work.
Right. Well, and that's where these three things, that's where I thought if I was going to go into a company and come alongside a CEO or again chief of HR, executive team, or maybe a board that I've worked with, if this is a main issue, these are the three assessments I would do with the team, right? The team in question, whether it's an executive team or the whole company or some subset. Time management assessment. So that gives you an understanding of what's happening in and outside of work, right? What are the stressors or perceived stressors from that time management? And then where are they on this burnout inventory? So those three things together, it gives you a really good picture of individuals and teams and levels of how close are they to sort of this threshold that he talked about in the book. I can't remember what he called the ceiling, but he had this, reference for sort of getting to this threshold of burnout or threshold of anxiety. Right? And if you don't have a lot of margin there, that's the big issue, right? If you don't have margin, it takes one stressor and you're over the top, and you're
gone for the whole
day.
You're
toast. So even for those people who are sort of right up to the threshold but aren't burnout yet, you can help coach them on, hey, if you have one unexpected life thing hit, you're done. You're going to be over the top, right? So even those people who are at risk, it'd be really insightful, hopefully, for them to kind of back off that edge if they can.
I can see that. So what was the fourth one you came up with?
Yeah, so as we move from assessing to solutions, there was several burnout solutions he talked about that I thought could be implemented. So there's 6 burnout solutions in the book. Workload, control, insufficient reward, community, fairness, or a values conflict. Those are sort of different, I guess, causes of the burnout, but there was solutions in each one of those that I thought of. So for workload, if that's sort of based on these inventories, if workload is the main issue, he had a really great idea in there about productivity hours, right? So set up clear boundaries in your life, either as an individual or a team. Hey, I'm going to work from 8 to 5, and I'm going to turn it on at 8, I'm going to turn it off at 5, right? Or some other thing that works for your job or the team.
And what I liked about that is he tied that also in with adrenal function. Because if you think of all of us in terms of, we have times of hyper productivity, whereas other times we're not as productive, understanding what times of the day. So and I've even changed my entire workload in terms of what I do in mornings, what I do in the afternoons, what I do on the day of the week. Now it's a little bit different also because I run a retail store. Well, we're open 9 to 6 Monday through Friday. I'm not going to tell the person, well, I know you're coming in at 9. It's my off-peak hours. Well, there's a time and place, and this does not work for all job positions.
No. Yeah, no, but like for me, to that point, I do my best thinking early in the morning, right? So if I can get to a Starbucks at 5:30 or 6, I can hammer out more work between 6 and 9 from a thinking perspective than most people do in a day, just because that's when I'm at like peak ability, right?
And it would also match with his graph. Right. That's typically we have more adrenal function earlier in the mornings.
Yeah. The second one he talked about, interestingly, was control, right? So lack of control, lack of feeling. So that's a major cause of anxiety, right? And I think, he referenced things like the, media and maybe the big socio-political events like a war, right? Or a pandemic or, economic people causes people stress because you can't control any of this stuff, right? So sometimes you have to sort of shut it off. But in terms of what the company can control, I think there's certainly, if that seems to be a cause of the burnout and all those assessments, I would directly start talking about measurements, KPIs, and looking at that kind of that life assessment pieces of what we just talked about, 1, 2, and 3, because let's figure out, is there something that the company can help that person better control or not?
Absolutely.
Right? Do they clearly tie their job to specific outcomes that are tied, like can they do that? Some jobs are better at that than others, but anything the organization can do to help that individual or that team achieve like controllable outcomes will change their perspective on control, right? And I think that'll just help reduce.
And I've noticed that as well too. Some people can't scale up to 30, 40, 50,000 feet. But if you say, okay, what's the vision of our company? We've already had podcasts on vision. But then if you say, hey, Josh, here's your KPIs. This is what I expect of you. Hey, or you should know where you need to be in your job performance. And that does not, whether or not your side wins in the next presidential election or whether or not our football team won this weekend. Right. What are your job KPIs? You have direct control, or you should be able to control how well you do there.
Yeah, I've worked with organizations before who have taken that so far as to have a badge, and on the back of the badge, it's a healthcare organization, mission, vision, values, and strategy. And typically, at least in healthcare, it's been like strategic pillars or something, right? And every person has then been able to, either looking at their badge or not, they know the mission, the vision, the values, the strategy, and then what their daily work does to impact at least one aspect of the strategy. Like that's the most healthy organization I've ever worked with. And so that's where I would work with that organization to figure out what are all those things and how do you make sure everyone's job is directly tied to that.
Absolutely. Yep. Now, what was the fifth thing you came up with on, as reading the book, How to Calm Your Mind? What was the fifth thing that really helps business performance?
Yeah. And so the last thing, and again, there's some other things with the burnout stuff, and we just didn't have time to get into all that today. But the last thing is team activities. So I think the last thing would be, there's some cool things in there around stimulation fasting and analog activities. Certainly, you could get into those things on your own, right, as an individual. But if you're looking at ways to build team culture, don't do those things that are heavy social media driven. Don't do those things requiring, a screen. But, maybe there's a way as a group to go do stimulation fasting or an analog weekend, right, with no phones, no screens over 48 hours on a retreat. Or, go pick up trash by the side of the road because there's no phones and screens involved in that. Or whatever, pick something, right, that has no digital aspect to it whatsoever, right, to help people connect relationally, but also just personally check away from all of the stressors related to many of the technologies we tend to kind of overuse at times.
And looking back with my company, some of the best team bonding I've had, they're very, I can't even think of any time it's ever been digital. It's always been analog. I've taken my company ziplining before. We've played company games. I took them one place. We actually did a life-size maze. Every time, I'm like, this is amazing. turn off the cell phone.
Yeah.
At least for...
Or leave it home.
Or leave it at home
Yeah,
for an
leave it
hour.
in the car. Or leave it in the car, right? Yeah, absolutely. Just leave the phone in the car or...
And I think if you're looking at how God's created us to be intentional relational beings.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's who we're made to be. And God does not text us through the phone. So,
And along those lines, a couple weeks ago, my daughter was saying, "Dad, I'm so stressed out." I'm like, "Well, how are you relaxing?" And she goes, "Dad, I'm relaxing by watching videos on TikTok."
Oh, geez.
And I go, "Hey,
I got this book."
I said, "How is that working for you?" Not very good. It's actually making things worse. I mean, I wasn't going to be the dad saying, "Get off TikTok." But, and she goes, "Dad, it helps not being on TikTok as much." You think? I have a book for you.
She got there on her own, huh?
Mm-hmm. Okay. But hey, next week, life application for the book, How to Calm Your Mind. And there's a lot of life applications. And I actually say there's more life applications for this book. And as we take care of our life, it will overflow into our business.
That's right. And he talks about that in the book, right? Actually, the value of this approach is it actually increases your productivity, your work abilities by taking care of all the life applications that are here.
Yeah, absolutely. So next week, life application for How to Calm Your Mind. But until then, hey, go out to the consultantofthecoach.com. Reach out, let us know any questions you have, or hey, as we've had more and more people every single week, even whether you're listening to us on YouTube or TikTok. Speaking of TikTok, write a question or two. Hey, what do you think about this?
Yep, sounds good.
Anyway, until next week, How to Calm Your Mind, very good book. Go out and pick it up if you haven't already. We'll have a little link in the show notes.
All right, take care.
Have a good one.